Teachable momentum. What's the science behind all this? We're going to share with you this morning a little bit about what works and what has not worked so well across the country. Even though sometimes we want to double down on a theory or a practice, I can share with you that the things that we're going to talk about today will in fact improve your results. They've improved the results in hundreds of situations just like yours. 90% poverty didn't bother it. Parent engagement that just wasn't existing didn't bother it. All kids can learn how to read. We believe for the last 20 years, and especially since the early 2000s when the national reading panels were assembled, that we've identified how do children read, how do they learn how to read, which skills are most critical, and at what points during reading development this occur. I think some of you who might have been going to school back in the 60s and 70s will recognize that kindergarten is now second grade. And I always get a nod of approval on that. It demands more from each one of us, and unfortunately I can't give you any more time during the day to get it done. And therein lies the problem. I think the answers have been very clear about what causes reading difficulty in most students and at what ages, and especially what causes reading difficulties with our poorest and poverty-ridden families. Are there practices, programs, and methods that work best for the most students? Well, I try to tell you that the programming part of it is lacking behind of the professional development piece of it. I think we've all been accustomed to every 3 to 5 years, there's a new program coming into our school. Very fatiguing for most of us, but we continue with this kind of element. So we want to share with you what doesn't work so well. I just have to get ready with this clicker here. So there really are about 9 out of the 20 that we've uncovered over the last 20 years, 9 different ideas that actually work. And they're replicable and sustainable. The data suggests begin early. How many of you have groups of kindergarten children coming to school that are not ready academically? Okay, well that's most of the room. I would have been surprised if there was no hands going up. Bethlehem School District, 17 elementary schools, 90% free and reduced lunch. 47% of their children come into kindergarten ready for kindergarten academically. They're today performing at 90%. And the worst performing building in the district, Lincoln, which was a focus school, if you're familiar with that designation, is leading the charge in that district. They are now outperforming the most affluent school in that district. So very possible to happen with the most poverty-ridden families that you can imagine. Comprehensive assessment plan. All these elements are critical to getting this success. Individual student goals and plans. Who is using Dibbles in the room here today? Okay, it's not that I'm a Dibbles advocate, but there is something going on within Dibbles and going on with the other assessment companies. You're familiar with the red, yellow, and green, right? Well, then there's a goal above that. And the goal above that is actually correlated to your statewide test in 5th and 6th grade. We'll talk more about that, but certainly you can come to the booth and find out more about Stephanie Stoller, the Director of Professional Development at the DMG Group, the authors of Dibbles, and what they have crafted inside Dibbles that's free to you for all the Dibbles users and the potential new users. A skill inventory and not a screener to inform instruction. How many of you are using a screener like a Dibbles and Ames Web, NWEA Maps, etc., to actually inform what instructional techniques should be used in small group? Okay, I'm going to share with you that there's really another step in this plan that you should be using in order to better identify the targeted skill groups you need. So in many of these sessions, we have been taught and told in the past that that's the way it should be done. But there's actually more effective techniques today that we can work with you on. Intervention group size, instructional logs. Intervention group size, that's interesting. Just a quick poll. How many of you have 8 people to a group, normally in Title I, or more? And how many of you have 6 or more to a group? Okay, well there'll be a slide in here interesting to talk to you about why 5 to 1 and 3 to 1 actually outperforms those numbers. Multi-sensory lessons connected to text. That's a topic in itself that could last 30 minutes. Professional development versus training. I was a little slow on the ticket there. Professional development versus training. How many of you use the in-service days that were allotted to do professional development? How many of you follow up with external resources to actually model and coach whatever you taught them? We'll talk about that technique, about Dr. Alsabel, Dr. Bloom, and about what they have learned and researched over their lifetime about how do you take a novice to an expert. And all hands on deck. I know we're very famous in the train-the-trainer model in this industry. However, there are backlashes to that approach up front, and we want to talk to you about what we mean by all hands on deck. Now let me reintroduce Carol Geary. At the time when I met Carol Geary in 2004-2005 school year, Carol was the assistant superintendent in charge of curriculum. I'll let her explain to you how she did that. And they still have a half-day kindergarten. That's 12 years later, and the sustainable results are still there. Carol?
Good morning, everybody. It's really great to be here today, and I'm always very excited to share our story. As Mike said, we became partners early on, and in 2006-2007 is when we first implemented a really solid professional development plan at Pleasant Valley. And we have a half-day kindergarten program, as you'll see from the slide, that was consistently at, on average, 45% to 50% benchmark at the end of the school year for years. And when I took over as the assistant superintendent, one of the things that I did was met with all my department chairs and leaders, teacher leaders in my school, and found that their biggest concern was, especially in the high school, that we were not sending them children who could read. I had a history teacher say to me, Carol, just send me kids that can read and I can do the rest. And so for me, the high school has always been symptomatic of the school system. So there's a breakdown because they're not forgetting how to read once they enter the high school. They're not learning how to read when they get there. And so really started to take a solid look at the whole system. And that began in kindergarten. When you look at 50% of your kids moving on at risk, that's a real problem. And so we implemented a really solid multi-tier system of support, an MTSS model with 3 tiers of instruction. We did some professional development on the science of teaching reading and really tried to learn what reading research is telling us we should be doing in the classroom. And then we provided a piece that was called Connecting to the Classroom, which actually took that science of teaching reading and turned it into something teachers could actually implement, which is always a struggle. How many times do you go to professional development and those teachers go back and only 10% actually try it? And if it goes successfully, maybe 5% of that group will try it again. And so the research on professional development is really clear. It can't just be a sit and get. There has to be some follow-up. And so the Connecting to the Classroom actually made the science real. And then we had coaches come in and model lessons for us, and then actually coached our teachers through the process, which is why you see the sustainable results today. Instruction actually changed in the classroom, which is what is the most important piece, was the most important piece, oops, I guess I'm not supposed to touch this black thing, sorry. Which was the most important piece for me, is that instruction changed in the classroom, and so that was really important. One of the things we did recognize though early on is that our incoming kindergarten scores were very low. It's a heavy lift when they're coming in 35% benchmark, 40% benchmark. I think the highest year we might have had 42% of our kids benchmark coming in. It's a big lift to get them from 40% to 90% or close to 100%. And we recognize that. So we had to do something early on, and we actually partnered with Step-by-Step Learning to develop a pre-K parent training that actually sent the message to parents saying, this is important. Kindergarten's important, pre-K is important. And so we did 6 sessions with parents. They brought their kids were in the school. They got to experience the school ahead of time, which actually made the transition to kindergarten very much easier. But we also trained parents on how to work with their children at home, which was really very important. And so we went from about 40% or so of our kids coming in at risk or proficient or ready for kindergarten to about 60%. So that was really a huge change. And the other thing that we saw very quickly, elementary teachers are very passionate about their kids being successful. So if they see lack of progress and they can't figure out what to do, their immediate reaction is to refer them to special ed because they need more support than they can provide. And we actually saw that recommendation of referrals to special ed go from about 17 to 20% in my school district down to 5% within the first 2 years. And so the number of students that actually were identified for special ed is far lower than it had been in the past. We were about 24% special ed in the entire school district, and right now, when the year I retired, we were at 12%. And so I was always sort of suspicious that this was a curriculum instruction problem. I really felt like our kids were curriculum deprived because we weren't able to meet them where they were. And I think this confirmed for me that if you provide really good instruction, multi-sensory instruction, that you're going to get some really good things to happen as a result. So that's the big things we put in place. And this is just to show you our trend data. I mean, after we became involved, we actually saw progress the first year, which, you know, typically the implementation dip occurs, but we actually saw trend data very differently. We saw success the first year, and it actually was sustainable throughout and is still there today. And just so you know, I think I'm probably one of the few school districts that still has a half-day program, and I couldn't sell it to my board to make it anything but a half-day program because we were so successful. So that's sort of what has happened at Pleasant Valley, and you're going to talk about Wilkes-Barre?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's amazing statistical change that happened in Pleasant Valley, happened in Wilkes-Barre, happened in Bethlehem, happened in Hazleton. I know these are all Pennsylvania schools, and if you're not from Pennsylvania, it sounds like a foreign language, but all these schools had the same thing in common. 70 to 90% poverty. I think there was one that was geared at 100% poverty. Wilkes-Barre was one of those districts at the 80% poverty range. I lived in that area when I was a younger man. I didn't recognize it when I went back. Highly transient population in Wilkes-Barre. I can't really explain why in a few minutes, but it is. This might be something that you're struggling with. High poverty, high transient rate. We can't teach them if they're not in school. We can't teach them if they're moving in halfway through the year in 6th grade. I understand that. However, there is a process, a quality control process that you can put in place that will improve your odds. And that's what we're really here to talk to you about, is how do you improve the odds, because there's a lot of things that haven't worked. We thought that lower class sizes would work. 25 years of looking at it, didn't work anywhere. Well, it might have worked in my classroom, but it didn't work across the country as we were doing it. So there's a lot of things that I thought personally would be a winner. I thought full-day kindergarten would be a winner. I thought everybody, universal pre-K would be a winner. I can show you districts and states that have universal pre-K in their building with certified teachers that are struggling the same way you are. It has not been the silver bullet. What has been the silver bullet is teacher effectiveness, the actual classroom teaching that's happening every day. If we impact that, numbers rise. Here's another example of it. It was 50% at the end of kindergarten every year at the end of the year. We happened to write a Striving Readers Grant, was successful. First year, amazing achievement. And if I told you that normally in the first year we're expecting 25 to 40% growth, you'll probably never believe that, because many of you have never experienced 25 to 40% growth in anything. So I understand why you wouldn't believe it. Trust me when I tell you, this is independent, unbiased evidence that has been evaluated by Lehigh University since 2005 for 12 years, and consistently they see the same thing happening. If in fact you can change the teaching techniques in the classroom to be differentiated and multi-sensory in nature, you'll increase your odds. And that's really what we're in this business to be. About 50 years worth in Title I across the country is to increase the odds for children. Achievement is exponential and sustained since 2011. They're well over 90%. There's no reason why we should be back in there. And so we exit when you're there and it's sustainable. That's when the train-the-trainer happens. One of the things Carol mentioned was how she had to start early. And so one of the things we realized with some statistics, and you have to appreciate, in the back room, as a researcher, I'm a numbers guy. So I want to know what's working, what's not working, and don't try to sell me on this stuff, because if it's not in your statistical numbers, it just didn't work the way we thought it would work. So that's my perspective on this, just pure and simple. Can you show me mathematically where it improved and how much? Well, one of the things Carol said that I inferred is that we're not doing enough for the parents before they get to us. And so we have to take a step up. The only difference in what we're going to tell you about is that this parent training actually produced an evidence. There's a lot of things you can do that seem fun to do with parents. What you want to ask yourself is, after the first year, did it improve the numbers? Are there more kids coming to kindergarten academically prepared for our kindergartens? And if they're not, well, then I'd say you should reflect and maybe change your ideas for that. We want you to experiment in that area. It's critically necessary. Let me have Carol tell you a little bit about the early start, the begin early, that we figured out was one of the systematic reasons, or the systemic reasons, that we have failure. Sorry, Carol.
Okay, I did talk to you a little bit about the parent training that we put in place. I'm going to give you a little bit more detail about what that looked like. We did determine that we had to start much earlier than we had in the past in helping children be prepared for kindergarten. And so we had what we called Ready, Set, Read, which as a company we call Teach Me to Read at Home. And we developed a process that was 6 sessions in length. The parents would come to the session, children would be in literacy centers, parents would get, or children would be in literacy centers, parents would get the research behind what we were showing them to do, and then they'd break into small group settings with teachers. Teachers model activities that they can do at home. The children come and join them. They practice with their children in front of a teacher so that that activity is actually done with fidelity, and then they go home and practice until the next session. What's been really interesting about it is, as Mike said, much of what we do as a company is research-based. And so Lehigh University actually researched this process that we put in place and found that if parents attended just one session, they came into kindergarten significantly higher, and they maintained that through the end of first grade. And so this training that we've provided with our parents has done 2 things. It's certainly given them the indication that kindergarten's important and they need to get their children ready for it. But it also has helped them with their understanding of how important those skills are coming in. So the first year, when kids were not coming in thinking that elemental P was 1 letter, we were really happy. And what actually ended up happening as a result of it is we started to do some partnering with pre-K providers as well, and did these pre-K roundtables. And so our children are actually coming in knowing their letter sounds, and the gestures that we use as a school district to help tie that into a multisensory approach. So that's what we saw. We're also beginning to work with school districts on developing a birth to age 3 component as well. If we can get them earlier, wouldn't it be great if they were coming in instead of 60%, which I'm seeing consistently in my school district, wouldn't it be great if they were coming in 80% or 90%, because things are being done at home that are really supporting that literacy development. And as I said, the difference in letter naming alone remained throughout kindergarten. That was like one of the biggest changes, but as a general rule, they came in higher and maintained that through first grade. And they did have less risk over time, and that's really the most important thing. We can start early, get parents on our team early, get kiddos learning earlier. When we get them, we can take them as far as they can go, and that's what's been really great about this whole process. So that was my experience with early literacy. I'm going to talk about.
It's always nice to have one of your customers retire and join your company with the expertise. Isn't that great? Assessment plan. Many of you are using benchmark screening. So I'll tell you what we think about benchmark screening. It's like when you go to the doctor's office and they check your blood pressure and your temperature. We're not ready for kidney dialysis. There certainly has to be other diagnostic tests performed, maybe an MRI or blood work. So Dibbles and AimsWeb and all the screeners, they're just there for a snapshot. They're never intended to actually decide what to do next It's just there to tell you whether you're in lukewarm water or very hot or very cold. We would always recommend a second stage, and we're not going to call those diagnostics, we're going to call those skill inventories, because isn't that what we're trying to uncover? Of the myriad of skills that a child needs to know in order to learn how to read, which one of those skills are they struggling with? I think they're in the show here tomorrow. Really Great Reading Company is one of them. QPS, Quick Phonics Screener, is another one. Stop by their booth. I think it's a $60 book that you can photocopy and share around with your kindergarten, first grade teachers, and here's how it works. You know, beginning sounds are critically not more important, but they're developmentally, you're going to know beginning sounds and ending sounds before medial sounds, correct? Okay, well, here's what happens. So you go through the diagnostic or the skill inventory with the child, and they can't do this. Draw a line, that's where you start, right there. We don't even have to use a screener. We can actually do that with every child. Why? Because we want to do differentiated instruction for every child, right? All we have to do is set a goal. So I just share with you, I'm not trying to downplay screeners at all. What I'm trying to say to you is the screener in itself is only a temperature device to say who's warm or who's cold. Then we want to look at a skill inventory to decide the actual intervention we want to do. Progress monitoring. How often should we do this? Well, there's actually a science that we figured out between it. I'll tell you what it is. Red children, children that are extremely and seriously deprived of the skills necessary to learn how to read. That child needs to be progress monitored often to see where the growth is because of the severity of the disease they have. In a sense, it's like the emergency room in the hospital. How quickly do you want the doctor over here, and how often do you want to see the nurse when you're in pain? Well, you want to see them pretty often. So I say that jokingly in a medical analogy for you, and that's what you have to do with assessment. You have to use it often. And quite frankly, when you go to the doctor, you're not feeling well, you don't take your neighbor's blood sample with you to fool the doctor to whether or not you're ill or not. We want to have a real reading on this on children. So we want to practice with authority, so to speak, these steps. Once a week for children that are very at risk, once every 2 to 3 weeks with children that are mildly at risk, and once a month on the cut line benchmark kids. Now, why do I say that? Green zone, you may refer to this as the green zone, where we kind of pull over and throw a party. The green zone statistically in every assessment made to man is 70 to 85% predictable. That means, mathematically, I'll challenge you, that's 15 to 30% failure rate. So if you get a child just at the cut line, you have a 30% chance that that child will slip back, whether it's the next assessment period or the next year, the summer slide, I think we call it. And think about it, you have a child, why don't you just go back and look at your data and find out where those children that slip back from one season to another, were they on the cut line of benchmark? Predictably so, they very much could be. So they've invented a blue zone. And a blue zone has a 95% accuracy rate. So I just share that with you. You can find out more at the booth and other sessions and webinars we're doing over the next month. Formative assessment. This is a perfect assessment to use. It's kind of informal, easy to do in the small groups. When they do independent practice, you just want to keep score. Did they do it correct? 3 in a row? 3 times in a row? They're on to the next skill. And that's where we see a breakdown within our classrooms. Children stay in the groups too long. They either don't get in there fast enough or they stay in there too long. How do you manage that system? The 40% and 50% results don't happen just because we're talking in the terminology that we're all comfortable with. It actually takes a different process. I thought I cut out there for a second. So the assessment plan strategy is important and critical in order to manage the business of creating more opportunities to read for children. Just a different way put. The group size. For those of you in 8 or more, statistically, and this has been replicated for decades, you can see, in the less than 25th percentile grouping, that would be children that might be in your red zone or very much at risk, it would take 340 hours to remediate that. That's 3 years of kindergarten. Who has space for that? No one. So you can see that the 8-to-1 is not as effective no matter how many children we're using it with. In the 1-to-1, which has been very effective, it's just not practical. We can't afford to do that. I mean, think about every child that's at risk in your school and you're going to give one-on-one instruction. Start hiring about 5,000 teachers across America. We just don't have enough personnel to do this or even time. So although it's very effective, it just couldn't be implemented. Now, 3-to-1. Most at-risk children, 3-to-1, and I'll tell you about 5-to-1 for the yellow-banded children, the children that have mild risk, but 92 hours. So let me just mathematically change this a little bit. The middle bar, the 1-to-1 ratio, is about, on average, if you do the math, it's about 50 hours. Is 100 hours, okay, I took 92, I rounded up even for you, 100 hours. Can you do an hour a day and 100 days of school? Or 40 minutes a day, 2 20-minute sessions? These are the most at-risk kids. What if you took 30% of the children that you're servicing and you put them in this size group? You will not necessarily be able to attack this all in 1 year, but quite frankly, if you don't have the success, if you break it apart and go 30% this year, 30% next year, 30% the following year, technically by 2nd or 3rd grade, you could have wiped out a lot of that. But if you keep doing the 8 to 10 to 1, it may never materialize for you. So there is technique here in the group size. Torgerson in 2000, you might recognize that name. That's Dr. Joe Torgerson from the Florida Center of Reading Research. And I offer that up as fcrr.org. Continue to look for them. They were a leading research center in the United States that influenced a lot of the decisions we were making across the country. And there are some things that Joe will tell you that just didn't work, that he thought would work. Lower class size was one of them, full day kindergarten, universal pre-K. Florida has done now for years, because I live in Florida. It just hasn't made the grade that we needed. It's not that it didn't improve anything, it didn't improve it to the number we needed it to improve to. So I challenge you with small group sizes. We mentioned about, and I'm going to turn it over to Carol in a second, we mentioned about professional development versus training. I'm going to let her tell you about all the professional development, no matter what she's teaching in professional development, this is the cycle she used.
One of the most important conversations that we had when we first met was the fact that I had a specific mind in what I wanted for professional development that was based on research. I was not interested in somebody just coming in and doing some training and leaving. I really wanted a model that was cyclical, that continued to support teachers, that continued to make changes in the classroom. So do you have the sit and get piece? Yeah, you certainly have the sit and get piece. The connecting it to the classroom piece that is also in part of that helps teachers take the transitional step from theory to practice. And then modeling in the classroom is really very important. So teachers actually get to see what this should look like. And that's always the hardest thing for teachers to do is, okay, you're telling me I'm supposed to be doing this, you're saying this is what it should look like in the classroom, but in my little brain, I can't envision what this looks like. And so the modeling is a really critical piece of what we do in order to get that connection to occur. So that's an important piece of it as well. And then having a safe place for teachers to do it, so that there's a coach that will go in, they will observe a lesson, they'll meet one-on-one with the teacher, and they'll talk about the good components of the lesson, things that were really great that they were doing, and things that they could be changing and doing a little bit more effectively so their children are actually able to attain the material more quickly. And that environment is really important for teachers. As a former teacher, I taught for 12 years. Certainly I didn't want to be meeting with somebody who was going to be going out and reporting to my principal all the things I screwed up in this process. So the part that's really was important to me is that is all kept strictly confidential between the coach and the teacher. And so the teachers felt very comfortable when the coach would come in because they knew it wasn't going any further than that. And so then we look at how performance is happening in the classroom. We get more feedback from the coach, and then we decide where we go from there. Is there some things we need to do additional training on? And so that's why this is a cyclical process, because the coaching and the mentoring that they receive and the modeling they receive are really important components of actually making an effective change process. And I do believe that's the reason why our scores have been sustained over a number of years. The first year of our project, our kindergarten teachers were either with a trainer or had a trainer in their classroom 15 days. And so I went to a kindergarten classroom and said, "How was your year?" She said, "Well, my father, who was a retired principal, always said, if you miss this much school, it's bad for your children." And I said, "You were 35% benchmark at the end of the year last year. You're now at 85. I think the 15 days were worth it." So it really is something that's really an important piece of that whole change process. So.
again, you'll have to appreciate, this isn't our opinion. This isn't our research. This is the evidence that's been collected over hundreds of schools by Lehigh University's research team, the Center for Research to Practice, by the late Dr. Ed Shapiro. So we're here to tell you what works and what doesn't work so well, and I'm sure there's a lot of things that we talked about that you may be practicing that you want to self-reflect to see if there's any improvement to be made in your systems. All hands on deck versus a train the trainer. I'm going to tell you why that's more effective. It's because a train the trainer is usually a quick blast course, 2 to 3 days to get people up to speed that in fact they're supposed to handle it. Reading First said there were 3 things you should do: buy a new core, hire a literacy coach, and use Dibbles. Well, let's just put Dibbles aside here. The cores did make an impact for us, although we're all buying them, and I'm not saying that they can't, but think about how we train people. And think about what that development is, not training. Training is an isolated event. Development is over a course of time, we help the person trying to learn fail in front of us so that we can pick them up and recognize it and make them better. The idea is we leave behind a great expert. So, all hands on deck. Building principles. Anyone here a building principle? Okay, for those of you that are not a building principle, when there's professional development in your organization, I know it's extremely difficult to sit in it all day. I'm just going to ask you to change from this to this. And why do I want you to change like that? Because I can tell you, as the president and founder of my organization, when I'm sitting in the training with our consultants, they absolutely know it's critical. It's not important anymore, it's critical. Why would Mike fly up from Florida, sit in this training in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for 3 days if it wasn't important? And that's the impact you make as a leader. So we talk about literacy leaders, but I don't know how we create them if they're not in the training. So we have to, all hands on deck, come in the training. Grade level teachers is after the leadership understands it, because whatever you're training on, I know there's going to be objections at the classroom level of, I don't know how to do this, please help me make decisions, I don't know what I'm going to do with my morning time anymore. It's only natural questions that people that work around you would be asking. How do you envision, well, if the person didn't go to the training, I don't know how they envision something that they didn't see yet. So it's very critical for our organization, all levels of the organization, to come together. Support personnel, that's Title I teachers, that's aides, everyone has to be on the same play, so to speak. Can you imagine the Super Bowl where the end has a different idea than the tight end and the quarterback, what they're going to run? Well, you know what happened. I don't think we'd be celebrating in Philadelphia the Eagles Super Bowl victory if we operated like that. So it has to be a team sport in this area. And what I mean by a team sport is all hands on deck. And then after everyone's trained, now that's the proper time to do the train the trainer, where people get actually trained how to administer the coaching, how to handle this going forward. How would you onboard a new teacher into a new grade? So there's a lot of systematic conversations that we help develop those people to continue and sustain the work. And obviously the numbers support my conversation with you, is that it does work and it's sustainable. How many times have you heard it's sustainable for 12 years after someone's gone? It's unheard of. We're lucky it sustains itself for 4 years and then something's different. I do want to wrap up a little bit before I hand it back over to Carol. We're in the process of publishing a book, and that's why we termed this session Teachable Momentum, and really a guide to closing the gap, and it goes into much more detail about how it's done specifically. Now, I don't know that reading a book has really changed the atmosphere that we live in. However, it is important. So today we handed you a sample copy of that book with a prologue and a foreword and the chapters and the references that we use, and those references are close friends of ours. They're all literacy experts and researchers. So if we know who you are, we will be happy to mail that book to you at no charge when it's published later this summer. The easiest way to do that is to take out a $20 bill and put, no, I'm just kidding you. Stop by the step-by-step learning booth and ask questions about some of the things that we couldn't possibly talk to you about in 30 minutes. And I gave you the copy of the book. You can certainly fill out a card. You will automatically be on that list to receive a book. Certainly you can ask for additional copies. We will eventually sell that book, and all proceeds will be given to charity, an educational charity every year. So I'm not in the business of publishing books to sell books for a living. I want to give it to you because I want you to make the same changes in your local schools as we saw that other people made. This is about kids. This is about our economy. This is about growing the educational value of our America. So sincerely, I thank you, and I'm going to turn the ending over to Carol.
I want to thank you also for being here today and giving up your time. I know, having been on that side of the seat many, many times, how important it is to just get some overview information sometimes to make some decisions. So we're going to, if you got a copy of our presentation, this is the final page. There's some back there if you didn't get it. But everything we do is based on research, and this is some really good information, where some of the information came from, where some of the research is located, and those kinds of things. Because I was a former math teacher, working for an early literacy company, which is quite startling even today for me. I could barely read, let alone teach about reading or talk about it. But through this process, I learned a tremendous amount. Those are some links that are there. But also just be mindful of that 90-90-90 research. 90% poverty, 90% minority, and 90% proficient. Those schools do exist out there. They have systems in place very similar to what we're talking about today. And if I can do it, you can do it. So stop by and see us. We'd love to talk to you. And thank you again for giving us your time today.